All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents, and welcome back to my channel, where we're going to be jumping into part 2 of our review of Whatifalthist video, The Coming Incel Revolution. I am again joined by the Dark Conservatarian. Night Shift 10,000 probably not going to make it this time, but we are going to pick up where we last left off. Just to give everyone a quick recap. So, Whatifalthist is a YouTube channel that makes videos primarily about alternative history. He looks at things that happen in history and asks the what if question, hence his title. But as of late, he's made a lot of social commentary about about societal revolution, in particular, coming right-wing backlash. And in this case, he's predicting an actual revolution of the incels, of men who want to get laid but can't. He believes are inevitably going to be part of a societal revolution that will totally upturn the social order that we currently live in. Now, as I mentioned last time, we're not trying to debunk his video per se. I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but I think the subject matter, he's definitely onto something. The question is, how is it all going to play out? So that's really what the goal of this was. But before we jump into it, Darkcon, you have any quick thoughts you'd like to recap from our last stream before we get going?
Not particularly. Maybe I should have given a more recent re-listen of the entirety of the first stream, because I did listen to it at least once, but it was like the following work week after we had last streamed here. But ever since then, I haven't. And that stream, of course, was 2 weeks ago right now. I just kind of pondering one question in my head just now, though, of is Rudyard going to be bringing up the whole thing about, or the idea of how much rape there would be going on, or raising the question how much rape would go on in such a revolution. I can only imagine that there are some more extreme and unironic sexist incels that think that just women should be property, if not already view them as that.
Well, when we get into the second half here, he'll get more into the specifics he has to say about what he thinks the revolution will entail. I think, now, does he address that topic explicitly? Not exactly, and I think mostly because he probably doesn't want the video getting taken down for being, a violation of YouTube's terms of service. The things I'm going to quickly...
the word rape, how dare you?
Indeed. Well, my channel's already demonetized, so I'm not worried about it. The things I want to recap quick. I think what it is important to talk about here is, let's not forget, incel has become somewhat of a meaningless term in our society, just because in today's day and age, if you are a man and you criticize women at all, you will immediately be called an incel. Basically, incel is just kind of the new catch-all insult for anyone who is critical of women in the modern age. Now, that being said, is there a growing subset of men who self-identify as involuntary celibates, incels? Yes, there is. And, they have their community on X and other parts of the internet. But studies are also showing that an increasing number of young men are virgins heading into adulthood. But what I was talking about last time, and where I think this really is relevant, is that historically, the reason men contribute to society, the reason they get jobs, work hard, become construction workers and mechanics and machinists and IT techs and business managers, and even also higher level of jobs like CEOs and entrepreneurs. The reason historically men do that at a core level is to get laid. Men work hard to make society better, to impress women so that they can get laid, have children, raise families. But as we see in the modern age, where a combination of government programs and modern technology has more or less removed most of the natural reasons that women needed men in their lives, they needed husbands to provide for them, to protect for them. Thanks to a combination of government programs and modern technology, women no longer need men the way they do. And as a result, women are getting much more picky about men. They only want to have relationships or get married with very, very high status men, which, that's always been the case. It's called hypergamy. We've talked about it on the channel before, but it's to its extreme now, because since women no longer need that same level of security, they're really doubling down on, we only want the highest quality men. Well, as a result, since at best, maybe the top 10%, even less of men are attractive to the vast majority of women. That leaves an increasingly large subset of men who feel like no matter how hard they work, they're never going to be able to achieve enough to impress a woman. And I think that if that number gets high enough, it is going to lead to a societal shift. Now, will that be an actual physical revolution? That I think is not quite as clean cut, but I do think what Whatifalthist is onto here is that the political divide has become largely one of male-female. If you look at people who are very strong on the political left and people who are very strong on the political right, you'll find that the political right is mostly male, the political left is mostly female. We see there is increased dissatisfaction between men and women when it comes to dating, especially when it comes to men, more and more of whom are functionally incels. They're not getting laid even though they want to. And it is going to cause some type of societal change. Now, is that going to be a revolution? That's what we're here to debate, but is what we're getting into in this second part here. So without further ado, let's continue with part 3 of the video, The Coming Incel Revolution.
Take it away, Red.
Shaming the bear. One of the sad realizations of my life was coming to terms with the idea that our elite are not intelligent or capable. They were making their decisions based off fear, reaction, and stupidity. The evil cabal exists, but they're not particularly competent or brilliant. The reason I say this is I see such profound disbalance, almost like a room that's about to burst with pressure versus another one next to it, which is a vacuum, sucking in pressure. I just can't believe no one else sees this besides me. These two rooms are the arrogance and delusion of our elite, which uses young, unmarried women as a demographic to pull authority from and dissatisfied young men. I've talked about this calculation in multiple videos for multiple...
Yes.
He goes mentioning like the elite not being particularly smart or anything like that of natural capability to where that they could just naturally like attract a plausible mate. And so therefore it almost makes me think like they go entering into politics because they think that's the only way that they are savvy, and they're not particularly handsome or skilled or anything like that, except for the art of the lie or whatever personality is needed to become a politician. And so they get up there, they find themselves a mate who's at least of like passable standards enough for them to marry. And then on later down the line, as we'll see, like as we do see, throughout many examples, there ends up being a whole bunch of cheating scandals because they think, oh, I'm married now, but I'm now more powerful than I ever was before. Now I can just go for the hotter looking person to make love to instead of my wife or husband or whatever, who is just average at best.
Okay, well, I think what you're talking about there is the politicians themselves being in positions of power, utilizing hypergamy to attract higher quality mates or attract multiple mates, given their position of power. I don't think that's really what he's talking about here. He's basically saying he doesn't believe the intellectual elites, the leaders of our society, the politicians, are that smart. Now, I'm going to agree with him in part, but not entirely. I think, are they intelligent? Probably. People don't typically get to positions of power if they're not at least reasonably intelligent. What they are is evil. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, what he rightly diagnoses is that in a Western society that has more or less adopted the democratic values of the West ever since World War I, that democratic, Republican, representative government is considered the idol of the West. Post World War I, post World War II, we've completely gotten rid of monarchy as a concept. If you are a developed Western nation, you take it for granted that representative democracy is a societal good. Well, I certainly don't agree with that, but that is what the West has taken for granted. However, what the elites, we see through the evolution of the representative government in the United States, in Europe, that what the politicians realize is that if they want to consolidate power for themselves, which all governments do, they have to appeal to the strongest demographics in order to get elected. And one of the most reliable demographics to appeal to is women. Because before, if you look at women back when only men can vote, When given the choice, do men typically value freedom or guaranteed security? Well, for the most part, men, in more so than women, are going to choose to value their individual freedom as opposed to security, because men, being the stronger sex, typically don't need, so long as they're committed to protecting themselves and or their family and their individual communities, men are much less naturally in need of additional protection beyond themselves coming from the state. And for that reason, they will tend to value freedom as opposed to security. Women, on the other hand, tend to value guaranteed security as opposed to freedom, because women, being the naturally weaker sex, have always historically had to depend on men for protection, not upon themselves. And I think what really we see when women get, when women's suffrage comes, when women get the vote, we start to see a hard shift towards more left-wing, progressive, socialist type policies, just because female voters, when given the choice, will always favor a stronger state if it means guaranteed security as opposed to individual liberty.
You know, that's a actual efficient or sufficient breakdown of the concept that Rudyard was talking about, because he mentioned of how that on average women are leftists, whereas on average men are on the right side of the political spectrum. And I don't think he really explained that, though, although you did just now, and I thought that was appreciated.
Okay, thank you. And I think the point he's making is this works for a time, and we see that the intellectual elite are indeed, if you look at how society is structured, they are certainly doubling down on their efforts to appeal to the females as a voter class. However, as men, particularly young fighting age men, have increasingly less and less in common with their female counterparts, and feel that they owe their government nothing and have nothing to live for or fight for. Appealing to the government at some level is going to require those young men as police officers, as soldiers, as a stabilizing force in society. Again, the thing I brought up before, society, we need construction workers, we need machinists, auto mechanics, people who maintain the electric and power grids, build our houses, maintain our internet connection. Young men are needed for all those things. And if if the traditional reward that they are seeking for doing those things, a wife and children, is not even on the table, the question is, why are they going to keep working? And further, if they're not going to keep working, what's going to happen? And I think that this is where it's not so much that the political elite's plan has failed, it's that they couldn't see far enough ahead to realize that this was the inevitable outcome of their choice to pander to a female voter as their exalted voting class.
Hours. But to boil it down, it's very simple, in fact, that the group which holds power is stupid. Don't taunt the bear. The other thing which I don't understand is the lack of an out. When I invite people to events or to do stuff, I always give an out. I'll say, I get the impression you're busy, but if you'd like to come, you're welcome to. It's a way of not hurting someone's face, which is one of the most important parts of social interactions. If you want to oppress a group, establish a path by which they can cooperate with the system as a way to divert talent that would otherwise rebel. This is why the British recruited the Scottish or Irish to fight and populate their colonial empires, or why the Romans would co-opt and assimilate the ruling classes of the regions they conquered. Modern dating is a humiliation ritual for young men. Society.
Before we continue there, I think just to emphasize, I do think the point he makes there is, again, the government, in order to accomplish its ends, needs an enforcer class. On the individual, on the city-state level, that's the police. On the national level, that's the military. And we can see through recruiting efforts, Western countries, the United States, but even more so in Europe, the UK, young men do not want to become police officers. They do not want to serve in the military, specifically because they no longer believe in what the government is fighting for. It really doesn't make any sense. On one hand, because the government is pandering to the female voting class, they're constantly telling young men, you are responsible, well, young men, but young white men in particular, young white Christian men, you are what's wrong with society. Every societal problem is your fault. Also, go fight and die for us so that we can have the things we want. I don't think it should be hard to see that's not a particularly useful pitch if you want to maintain a strong enforcer class.
won't tell you the rules of how to attract women, and in fact, it will give you the exact wrong advice. Then if you do learn what the rules are and share them, society will shame or cancel you. If you don't get girls, you'll be shamed. If you do too well with girls, you can easily get a false allegation which could ruin your life, or you'll be shamed for being a frat boy or fuck boy. If you try to hold your female partners to any standard, society will shame you for that, while she's able to complain about you for anything. One of the things which I'm shocked our culture accepts is that it's perfectly normal for women to complain about the men in their lives publicly and on the internet. One of my good friends had...
Now, I think, no, he's definitely onto something here. I think it's true, most young men don't want to date because they feel they're going to be rejected. And if because women have increasingly high standards, a lot of men just say, you know what, it's not worth even trying, I'm checking out. But as he points out, those men, even those men that are very attractive, are in the top 10 to 5% of men. If they interact with women, and she gets pissed off, we saw in the Me Too era, all she's got to do is make an allegation against you, and that allegation itself, apart from any supporting evidence, could be enough to put an end to your career or even send you to prison. So modern men are really in a situation where if you want to pursue relationships with women, if you're really unsuccessful, you'll be shamed. If you're really successful, you'll be shamed as a player for not committing. And if that's not the worst of it, if a woman gets particularly pissed with you, she can choose to use with you to ruin your reputation. And of course, as he's getting into here, we see with platforms like TikTok and whatnot, it's more or less just considered the way things go that women post public intimate details about their relationships with men on the internet for the purpose of making fun of and shaming women. Whereas if you're a man and you do this about a woman, that's considered completely unacceptable. So the question would be, as a modern man today, what's my incentive to go out and pursue relationships with women?
All these issues almost makes me go thinking of what would be the man version of the truth to power speech that was given in the Barbie movie. Have you ever cared to just got a notification from actual Justice Warrior. Trump survives again, and I wonder what that's about.
Oh, you haven't seen that yet?
No.
Okay, well, since you just brought it up, as an aside, for anyone who may not be aware, Donald Trump has survived another assassination attempt as of today. Maybe we can talk about that at the end of this video. But Donald Trump is truly becoming a historical figure. 2 impeachments, 4 criminal trials, 91 charges, and 2 attempts at his life, and he's still standing. I'm not, as I've said before, I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. I got a lot of problems with Donald Trump, but you can't help but admire the man, especially considering how much he has endured.
Wow. Oh, but anyways, have you ever seen the Barbie movie, or even that posts of the one truth to power speech of where that the one mother is going on about, oh, it's so hard to be a woman and so forth?
I would not give a dime to the people who made the Barbie movie, so no, I did not see it. I did read some reviews.
Definitely understandable.
I've not seen the speech I've not seen or heard the speech you referenced, but I'm aware of it from the read. So
I do know that there was like a text version of it shared around on Facebook a while ago when it was still in theaters. But just to go wondering, what would the man version of that be? It would be something to the effect of, or one of the things mentioned would probably go on about how that men, you're not allowed to point out flaws with women, but women are allowed to talk all the world about you and so forth.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's continue.
His girlfriend talk about his sexual inadequacies publicly on Twitter. Look at how on TikTok, there's an entire industry of women posting their dating advice with men, often talking about very private details, such as sex or things which the men said in confidence. This sort of thing is evil in that it's a complete violation of social trust. This sort of thing serves literally zero social benefit. These social platforms have a lot of control over the content they let out. How come this stuff is accepted, but YouTube will take down my videos on Southeast Asian anthropology or American regional cultures? This gets even worse with marriage, where there's a 50% chance if a man gets married, he'll get divorced, with in 70% of cases being started by the women, and among the college-educated ruling class, it's 90%. And statistically, most
Okay, and I've talked about this on my channel a lot. We've done a lot of previous streams, but he's going again to say that those men that do get married, there's at least somewhere between a 30 and 50% chance that the marriage will end in divorce. Family law is stacked against you as a man. You disproportionately bear all the risk of divorce. And thankfully, because of how the legal system and welfare system has been set up, women generally do not need to fear, no matter whether they're dirt poor, whether they're filthy rich. They don't need to be afraid of their standard of living changing, because the government will guarantee, either by making the man pay or by making other men pay, to have all their needs met. So overwhelmingly, divorces are initiated by women, and they tend to be the benefactors of said divorce. So again, even those men that do end up getting married are under constant risk, which of course raises the question: why should a modern man want to get married? Why should a modern man want to date? It just goes. I think he is doing a very good job of pointing out, as a man, if you want to have relationships with women, it's an uphill battle, and you will disproportionately bear all the risks. Meanwhile, society and law have been structured to remove those risks. Any risks she might traditionally have borne have been legally removed from her and placed on either you as an individual or on male taxpayers as a whole.
Yeah. It's kind of related to it also is one of the underlying reasons as to why that the homelessness population is more made up of men. In fact, might be a super majority of them is more made up of men than it is of women. Although that doesn't prevent some women, or even men for that matter, posing as homeless people, even though that they are likely not homeless themselves. Like, seriously, have you ever seen that, of where that there will be an exceptionally clean and well-kempt homeless, air quotes, person on the side of the road with a cardboard sign asking for money?
Yes, and this is actually a true story. I remember I live in a rural community in the American South. I don't see a lot of homeless people, but there was one day I was in town. I remember seeing a very good-looking young woman. She looked like she was probably 19, 20 years old, clean, well-dressed. Certainly did not strike me as someone who was homeless or couldn't have given her the nicety of her clothing and how physically attractive she was. Finding a place to live or someone who'd be willing to put her up would not seem very difficult. And she was holding a sign, said pregnant, nowhere to go, help. And I went into the grocery store, came back out, and between walking into the grocery store and walking out, I saw at least 8 different people give her cash and food and a bunch of other things. And it just goes to show, can you imagine a man with a similar sign? How many people would have given him that much stuff?
Pretty privileged, I guess.
Exactly.
I still remember, I don't know why that this memory stuck to me, but it has. I remember points of 2017, I just passing by would see this one video that was from Cult of Dusty. It was all privileges that exist aside from white privilege, and the thumbnail was just a lady with a big pair of breasts, and so it was big boob privilege, and all the other kinds of privileges that aren't necessarily inherently related to somebody's arbitrary identity, that being male or white.
All right, let's keep going.
Cases, this is just because the woman got bored, not because the man did anything wrong, but she can often take a majority of a man's income and his children. The courts are obscenely biased against men. Society will take a woman's word whether or not there's any evidence behind it. I had some tweets which went viral where I talked about all the ways young, especially white men, are actually discriminated against in society. We've already talked about discrimination in the courts, which, if you want to add another element, includes the discrimination against Western citizen populations or political conservatives. I compared the oppression of young white men in the Western world to literal conquered nations, like the Irish under English colonialism, and found the only difference to be that the Irish weren't allowed to vote or own property, while modern whites can. This also includes job hiring, in which 95% of new jobs created since COVID in major companies have gone to minorities. This means that there's basically a war by established whites who run these companies against the young men trying to get started. Almost all young white men in big companies have been told that they won't get promoted, and instead diversity hires will. This is hard.
And here I can't disagree. I mean, I can say, obviously, I'm not going to talk about the size of company that I work for, but I have definitely seen firsthand there is a huge push, especially in corporate America, thanks to DEI programs, BlackRock's EHG or ESG score, whatever it's called. Yeah, there is huge. Companies are under huge pressure to hire women or minorities as opposed to what men or white men specifically, and that does create. And we can see, especially if you're active on X or any other online communities, you can see that. Well, I remember being a child in the 90s and the early 2000s and believing that racism was largely a thing of the past. People hardly ever talked about racial animosity or racial issues. But when you see the amount of quote unquote white nationalists that are flaring up again in America, I think that is largely a reaction. I mean, it's proof that they're reacting to the political establishment's goal of pandering to the female vote, pandering to the minority vote by instituting all these programs that actively discriminate against white men.
Or just the idea that it's okay for Black and brown people to, and Asians too, for that matter, to be racist at white people and try to redefine that as not racism.
Exactly.
And you say ESG score from BlackRock. Is this like something that they're doing within their own company for DEI initiatives, or is this some kind of chart or whatever that they have to keep track of other people's diversity hiring?
Well, basically, they assign 2 Fortune 500 companies a score based on how well they're being inclusive, if you will. And given BlackRock's role, both close connection to the government and they're trying to buy up pretty much all the property in the United States, they definitely have a lot of sway. It would take a whole another stream to talk about BlackRock specifically. But, and I should point out, JC Armitage says almost all white nationalist groups are feds, by the way. Yes, I would agree. I would agree that many of the leaders in the so-called white nationalist movements are very closely associated with, if not outright, feds themselves. However, they are directing those efforts, I think, in an effort to help further and identify people who might stand against the government's plan. But either way, whether the people leading these groups are feds or whether their followers are just a bunch of young, disgruntled white men, you never could get the ideology of white nationalism was basically dead in the water until I would argue the Obama administration, and we began to see this huge push within government to create these initiatives to favor both minority women as opposed to on one spectrum compared to white men on the other end of the spectrum.
To overemphasize in that, in addition to the sexual inadequacy, is financial inadequacy, which further emphasizes the sexual issues. One of the things I find shocking in my own personal network and with my personal projects is the insane level of quality I can get. I'll be working with people and think, I don't really have the money to pay you for this, but you should be the CEO of a company or working for the government's foreign policy. Instead, you're doing a project with the Whatifalthist guy since society stopped hiring white men. There is a giant class of obscenely competent young men who are dissatisfied and have nothing better to do. Part 4, download this revolution. Okay, so I'm going to pause there quickly. And again, I'd say, I think here's where we need to talk about what is this revolution actually going to look like. And, you know, he's going to get into it here, but here's my opinion. Whether or not there's actually violence, what I see happening, and I would say based on both my personal anecdotal experience and what I would reason the logical outcome being if we assume humanity is by and large lazy and will pick the path of least resistance, I think as more and more men see that society wants them to work hard, they want them to maintain the power grid, they want them to build houses and fix cars and do backbreaking work so that women and a very, very small minority of men can have the sexual gratification
and happy lives they want. Meanwhile, they get nothing in return. Could that lead to a violent revolution? Yes, but I think before there's an actual violent revolution, there is something else to consider, and that's that more and more young men are turning to alternatives, basically simulation, to get the things that they would rather have. And I've personally met young men who basically are working as Uber drivers / McDonald's cashiers. They live at home with their parents, and basically they say, my goal is to make just enough money that I can keep surviving and spend every last waking second playing video games and watching porn. Now, is that a healthy way to live your life? I would say no. However, what that does tell me is that what they're saying is, if life is really hard and I have to do all this hard work and not actually get the societal achievement and women that I want, I can at least just work as little as possible and more or less simulate those desires. My social achievements, I simulate video games. My sexual gratification, I simulate through porn. And then, I should just work jobs that aren't so hard to sustain myself doing that. And I think before we get to an actual violent revolution, if one comes at all, what you're going to see is more and more so men just dropping out of the hard labor force, refusing to do difficult jobs, and instead wasting their lives away on these simulations to get some measure of the life they want vicariously through video games or porn. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Darkon.
No, I don't really. I will say that I personally so far, it's full disclosure, everybody, in case you don't know, and somehow you're uninformed about this, even though how many years I go mentioning it. Have no love life, so my life is pretty mediocre. But at the same time, I still get a little bit of motivation out of some physical labor. Although I guess maybe some people are just not as hardwired as me. There's something that I get I don't know if it's a dopamine or serotonin, either one of those two, good feeling brain chemicals rush of whenever I think of the idea of a hard day's work and then coming back home to just, relax. And I feel with the hard work, hard day's work, I feel that evening of rest is more well earned. I also had one question. This is kind of more related to the last pause, but you say that your company is initiating some DEI initiatives.
Well, I'm not going to talk so much about my personal life. I can just say that I do work for a company where I can see firsthand at the higher levels of management, they are under a great deal of pressure to hire women and minorities as opposed to white men.
They're under pressure, but are they actually buckling to it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know how much I can attest to that because, well, you say that you'll live in the South, so I don't know of what part of the South that would be, but around the Mississippi River areas, all the way from West Alabama, all the way around Kentucky and Tennessee, that area right there. I do know that closer to the river, that is still considered the South, is also pretty liberal, to use the Rush Limbaugh usage of the word liberal part of the country, to where that it would be kind of expected. And I live here in good old Wichita, Kansas, that is at best a purple city that isn't that liberal in the grand scheme of things. So it's not like that. So I guess there's no ability for me to be able to get an accurate gauge on how DEI is getting a hold of, or for me to be able to witness that. Although I will say that the company that I work for, at least anyways, it's still pretty much super majority white males as it is right now. So no good sign that they're buckling to any DEI or anything like that.
Okay. Well, I will just say, I'm not going to say which state, but the state I live in was mentioned among those states that you just listed as being in the South. I personally live, like I said, in a rural community that is primarily white. But what I can say about the South is, especially large cities within the South are becoming more liberal as people from and businesses from California ironically enough, are leaving California thanks to the high progressive tax burden, yet they're moving to cities in traditionally conservative areas, and they're continuing to vote blue despite why they left where they were. So I know many of my neighbors say, we don't want you here. And, they're in, to be fair, it's at least a couple hours drive to get to a big city from where I'm at, but there are changes coming because of the traditional conservative South is still there, but there are a lot of liberals moving into larger urban areas within the South as well. So we're seeing societal change on all fronts.
Yeah.
I saw this tweet which did very well, which said, "You don't understand. You have an entire generation of fighting-aged men with nothing worth living for. You should be scared." This summarizes how I feel, and I'm pretty sure the guy who wrote that tweet watches my channel. The thing I don't understand is how the elite goads young men and eggs them on. A thing is that humiliation is incredibly degrading, especially for young men, since they're society's foot soldiers and haven't passed on their genes yet. The thing which shocks me is how much the left gloats over its victory, removing young men from all culture, with Google Gemini as a great example, not hiring almost any young men, or basically making humiliation rituals in the education or corporate system. If you're
well, here I think he's absolutely right. Eventually, the government needs an enforcer class. It needs police officers and military to maintain its power. If the police and military require young fighting age men, then if you have larger and larger subsets of fighting age men with nothing worth living for and nothing worth fighting for, and certainly no allegiance to the very government that actively despises them, it's going to cause issues. Now, I should, as an aside, I don't think it's good that a lot of that men drop out of society, work just as little as possible and spend the rest of their times, playing video games and watching porn. I think ultimately that's going to lead you into depression, and it's not going to be fulfilling. But either way, I can see some men see that as a preferable option as opposed to doing backbreaking work that is not going to result in getting them a wife or giving them a family. Now, we'll get into whether or not, like I said, what could be the tipping point that would actually make the revolution turn violent. That's still, I think, up for debate. But I'd be much more scared before a violent revolution comes. I think you need to look at the economic collapse that's going to come. We already know economic collapse is on the horizon thanks to the imminent collapse of the US dollar. But beyond that, a workforce of men that is unwilling to do the work that'll be necessary to rebuild society later on. I think that is bound to cause issues.
Mm-hmm.
Wise conqueror, don't gloat in your victory too much, since you derive no benefit from it and you want the conquered to cooperate. That being said, the left is not wise. It is in fact suicidally delusional. Another thing to keep track of is the two biggest influences young men have from women are porn and feminism. One of them makes them degrade women, seeing them as not respectable or as sex objects, while the other one is porn. The thing is, men hold the balance of actual physical force in society, and women have
porn. I think he bleeped out the word porn because he didn't want his video to get demonetized. Now,
okay. I was wondering if that ding I was hearing was a bleep of sorts.
Now, here, I think there's, forgive me if this sounds harsh, but it strikes me as blatantly obvious. Everyone says porn makes women into sex objects. I hate to break it to you, but the primary interest men have always had in women is sex. Now, do I think porn is good for society? Generally speaking, no. I think it's a large amount of porn addicted men is not good for society. It's not healthy. It does not make you be productive. But on one hand, I don't think the government is eager to get rid of porn because porn is a sedative. I think men would be much more violent if we'd already be experiencing higher rates of violence, especially sexual violence, if there was no porn, because that is, whether it's the right thing to do or not, it is a means by which sexually frustrated men are seeking to fulfill their sexual desires. And at least for the time, it is slowing down any sort of violent revolution that would come from sexless men. Now, like I said, is that good? I don't think so. But I also think that, like it or not, I do believe the intellectual elites are aware of this. And for that reason, I don't think they're eager to get rid of porn anytime soon.
Then again, maybe the reason why that the dissident or fringe right or extremely religious right are looking to ban porn is just for exactly that reason. They want more men to get more antsy for violence, therefore to spur along the next American Revolution faster,
Indeed.
as
Perhaps.
opposed to porn being a pacifier for all the modern man.
I would say the so-called authoritarian right, the people who are popping up, trying to say Hitler was actually the good guy, totalitarianism is good, and we need to rise up and take over the government. Yeah, they are largely the ones saying we want to ban video games, we want to ban porn. So I can see how that would definitely benefit their agenda.
Have offset that over history by being kind and with sex. Men in general either view women as sex objects or wife material.
Yes, although I think there he's saying men see women as one thing that women struggle to grasp is men, when it comes to who a man will smash and who a man will marry, the standards are pretty low to smash and high to marry. An ugly, overweight woman can hop on Tinder and she'll be having sex within the hour. On the other hand, if she wants to get married, the odds that the man she is going to wants to marry her are pretty low, even if he wants to have sex with her. The bar for being interested in sex is almost nothing when it comes to men, but the bar for being interested in wifing a woman up is in fact very high. Yeah, I think that's what he's trying to say, and yes, I would believe he's right.
Red Feather says in the chat, depends on the type. That lolly stuff and Violet are a kind is just deranged. Well, that's kind of aside the point, though. But yeah, that's pretty fucked up, though, Red.
Women, for reasons I don't understand, can't figure this out, and so portray themselves as one and expect to be treated as the other. Men tend to view women who aren't of marriage material with complete contempt. The thing is, we've removed the positive feminine from life. It's hard for women to understand how dangerous that is. Women are the humanizing force on men, and pulling out the chance of taking in the positive feminine will turn men absolutely violent. Men like violence, and if they're not incentivized against it,
I gotta say, that's
things
a nice
are going to get really ugly.
that guy has.
Indeed.
I remember there was this TV show where they tried to get a group of young men and young women to survive on islands by themselves. And what happened next was basically what you'd expect, where the young men did very well and the young women had to be rescued by the TV crew.
Yeah, I'm also familiar with that show. Yeah, I don't remember what that show was called, but yes, I am familiar with it. And I think it goes to show men and women need each other. Men build society, women sustain society. What by and large makes women important is the fact that without women, we can't have babies. But without men, we can't build a safe, productive society. And I think government when that is left of its own devices, we find that a natural society built on monogamy, men and women getting married and forming families is the natural result. It's only when the government messes with the natural incentives in order to accumulate its own power that this gets screwed up and eventually leads to this kind of societal collapse because it can't be sustained.
That gun that was shown was an F-2000, by the way. Well, thank you, JC Armitage.
And although this is silly, I think it's indicative of some underlying reality of the human condition, in that, in the state of nature, it's men's role to fight against the outside world with things like war or the jungle or farming, and women form the heart of the community away from all of that. And if you look over history, you find that there are patriarchal waves roughly every 500 years, with previous examples being the Augustan reforms, the Reformation, the fall of Rome around 1000 AD and more. So it wouldn't be that strange to imagine we'd have another one of these soon. And
here I will say history may not repeat, but it certainly does rhyme. So I definitely think, again, I think he's onto something here. Now, the question still is, what's this particular revolution going to look like? I'm still more inclined to think it's going to be one more of economic collapse where men just refuse to work, as opposed to it becoming violent, although it certainly may at some point. But I would say, yeah, he's onto something here in that history may not repeat, but it certainly does rhyme.
Do you think that if there wasn't as much automation nowadays, but the same tensions within everybody's sex life stays the same, incel related issues, feminist related issues, and all that part of it stays the same. Do you think that a revolution would be less likely?
I guess the only thing I could say there is with the automation question, that would all depend on whether or not we actually achieve what I call the Wall-E society. You're familiar with the Disney movie Wall-E, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
I've seen all the Pixar movies.
yeah. So basically, automation takes away the pattern I see, and I've talked about this in my videos about universal basic income, is that automation really historically, despite what people say, it doesn't get rid of jobs, it just creates new ones. As certain jobs go away due to automation, so long as the free market is left to its own devices and people have more free time, new jobs emerge and nothing ever gets fully automated. The only way that would change is if automation were to get so good that we effectively reached a Wall-E society where robots can do literally everything. So no one has to work because there's robots doing literally everything all the time. Now, how would that look? Well, I mean, you saw what they predicted in everybody just being a bunch of fat turds flying around on floating wheelchairs because robots are doing everything for them. Is that how it would look? I don't know. In that case, I don't see why people would even reproduce at all. I think that is a factor in what's going on. I would say automation, I would really only be worried about that playing a major role in the patriarchal revolution, if you will, if automation got so effective that it was effectively a Wall-E society, which as good as automation's getting, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, you go mentioning like a economic revolution as opposed to a sexual revolution, which a sexual revolution is what Rudyard is more specifically trying to get at. But then you go saying, I think it's going to be more of an economic revolution. So I'm just trying to see what do you think could like if the thing of the dynamics of everybody's sex lives within the West stayed the same as it is, but what else? What would have to change aside from that one thing in order to prevent the economic revolution that you are juxtaposing would happen?
Okay, well, ironically enough, J.C. Armitage brings it up here. What he points out is that each of these societal revolutions all correspond with particular government failures, in particular, government economic failures. I've said what we need to, the only thing that can really fix our economic woes right now is would be ending the Fed and ending government intervention in the economy, allowing the hard global recession to occur, and then allowing the free market to rearrange society based on the actual wants and needs of individuals. Of course, do I see government doing that willingly? Absolutely not. So I think the coming economic collapse that corresponds with the collapse of the U.S. dollar, et cetera, is going to come. But J.C. Armitage is 100% correct in that the government failures in that regard, the problems that brought about these societal revolutions, socialism, communism, feminism, those are always engines by which governments accumulate power for themselves, and it works for a while, but to their own detriment because it ultimately is unsustainable and destroys society.
Well, I guess if there wasn't as much money manipulation with the Fed and there was more economic freedom, well, then that would just, and probably not as much of a welfare state as well, that probably would just automatically spur along like more women flocking towards more men, be it because they actually need a man or I don't know. They're not being gaslit by society in one way or another to say that they don't need a man. They can just rely on the welfare system or whatever. So maybe,
and that's my whole point.
At that point, it would be not a sexual revolution nor an economic one.
Without the combination of modern technology, social welfare, and the police state of family law, the current system of feminism would be unsustainable. When men in the state of nature, women need men to protect them. Therefore, compromised forced monogamy is the norm in the state of nature without state intervention. So yes, I think remove social welfare programs, remove the police, remove the military, remove the courts and family law, and you'll see that a traditional patriarchal society will reemerge very quickly. Women will be begging for it, if for no reason than their own protection. I mean, put it this way: you asked the question, what about like mass rapes taking place during incel revolution? I'm not saying this is how it's gonna go down, but let's imagine like one day, snap of the fingers, all the police departments in America disband, the military disbands, and the government collapses. And now a large group of young, frustrated young men realize, hey, if I go outside and I start raping women, no one's going to stop me. I mean, if that happens on a mass scale, I strongly suspect women are going to start wanting to go immediately back to a patriarchal society where they have a husband to protect them in exchange for the traditional exchange. You work, provide, and protect for the family. I provide you sex and care for the children. We both get what we want. I mean, I think that will come back very fast. The mass state of lawlessness where tons of men are raping tons of women. Again, I'm not even saying that is how it would play out, but if it started for any conceivable amount of time, I feel like through the compliance of women themselves, we'd be right back to a natural patriarchal society.
Okay.
Happens with these is that in a world that's barbaric, men install themselves as higher social status than women because they're more responsible for facing the threats of the outside world. And then as society gets safer, women's social status rises, and men are willing to do this because it helps the entire society and them in general, until what happens is the men have no incentive to cooperate in the society, and thus the society falls apart and the cycle restarts. A point I'd like to throw out here is that we're getting to the point where among young people, the political divide is largely that of gender, where across the industrialized world, most young men tilt right and most young women tilt left. And you look at this and you think, how are they going to breed and start families?
Say that again.
I'm kind of interested in this graph. Con lib, conservative liberal.
Basically, what he's saying is across the West, what you can see, this is what he briefly mentioned it before, but the political divide in countries is very well predicted by sex. If you are a woman, it's far more likely that you're a social liberal, a political leftist. If you are a man, it's far more likely that you're a social conservative, political right. It's not a perfect graph, but as you can see, it trends in that direction such that a very good way of predicting who's going to vote what way is to predict that women will vote left and men will vote right.
I'm surprised that they're saying that so many more men in South Korea are conservative than U.S. men on a per capita basis, of course.
And I would say South Korea, at least in terms of the societal collapse, as far as he would describe it, is probably at least 10 to 20 years further ahead of the United States. I think in the United States, women are still having something like 1.5 children per woman, which is below birth replacement rate. But in South Korea, it's like 0.5%. So it's which means that whatever the hard numbers of incels are, clearly there are a lot more real incels in Korea than there are in the United States, even though we're trending in that right direction.
Ouch. You do know that voting conservative does not equal being pro-freedom, right? I mean, of course, JC Armitage. I mean, I wasn't trying to imply such.
I'm not implying such either.
Trying to imply otherwise, I mean.
But let's face it, libertarianism may be the right ideology. It's unfortunately most people are too stupid to figure it out. So I don't think we're ever going to get rid of the regular right-left dynamic, at least in society at large.
That would be
and this trend is just getting more and more pronounced over time. I was talking to my good friend Homath about where you meet women today. We've already spoken in this video about how on.
As an aside, Homath is a great channel. He's got some hilarious videos, all of which make good points.
Oh, at first I thought it was like a lady who was being self-deprecating or something.
No, but it's a man basically calling out stupid women. Hoes.
Okay.
Line dating won't work for men. However, on top of that, picking up girls in places like parks or bookstores has become taboo alongside work. This leaves bars and nightclubs. The thing is that bars or clubs don't tend to attract good women and skew the odds against men in every possible way. The
Wow.
logic for nightclubs is to offer women attention as easily as possible while lowering the chances a woman has to offer anything to the man, which is why women like them. Likewise, people say you can meet girls at community or friend groups, but as of now, there's an unspoken rule in a lot of these that you shouldn't date them, since it'll disturb the intricate friend networks which make up those communities. As well as that, women tend to just do less activities than men. Most young women just go to work and then home. Homath then said one of the most blackpilling things in my life with, I guess there's nowhere anymore. In my personal experience,
I
of the
quite agree
50
with
most
that.
handsome
Okay, so I would say, like, if you see the chart he showed, online dating has become the preferred method of meeting, or at least the most common meeting place. And when you say you don't necessarily agree with that, I mean, where
No,
do you see
I'm
people
not talking
meeting?
about the idea that women like to go out and do stuff less than that of men. I mean, yeah, men are more sports driven than women, but at the same time, I would think that women are a little bit more club oriented than men. Well, maybe not by that much. So maybe the difference isn't made up for as much as I think.
Okay.
charismatic,
I don't
intelligent,
know.
and
I'd have to
successful
think about it
guys I
more. Sorry.
know, the vast majority are single, even though they have a lot to offer. They just aren't that many mechanisms through which you can meet the other sex. There was a point in my life in which a majority of my friends were fuckboys, and they could generally get laid a lot, but not meet women they wanted or respected enough to date or marry. This revolt, which would be tied in with conservative politics and values, would not be pushed by losers. The upper class men, even if their romantic lives are good now, realize how much in the long term the society is stacked against their reproductive self-interests, with stuff like divorce law, the indoctrination of their children, or the destruction of their societies in general. Revolutions work when there are counter-elites who support them rather than just being peasant uprisings, which always get crushed. The incel revolution would be led by chads who would gather incel soldiers to fight for them.
Okay.
So Andrew Tate just having a whole army of a whole bunch of nerd weaklings behind him.
I don't see that clown leading any kind of societal revolution, though. I think the point he makes is, if there were to be an actual quote unquote incel revolution that succeeds, yes, it's going to need leadership. Now, is that going to be Andrew Tate? Hell no, that guy's a clown. But
No,
is there,
not him specifically. I'm just it was more of an arbitrary example than anything, but just the people who are like Andrew Tate adjacent, I guess.
yeah, is there conceivably a messianic incel type figure who could lead them in such a revolution? I think conceivably there could be. I think that person is probably more likely to be. I don't see it being him. I see a Donald Trump type figure being more of the type of person who could do that. Not that I think Donald Trump would be such a figure, but I'm thinking of someone who's has real political power, but is also not necessarily part of the traditional political establishment. Could conceivably be someone to be such a leader. Right now, I can't think of an actual example. Like I don't think Donald Trump is such an example. I'm just saying someone of his social notoriety would be the kind of leader you would need. I don't know who that would be.
Maybe a Matt Gaetz type or something.
All right, we'll keep going.
Okay.
Human nature is often a funny thing, and people look back in history and think, why do people wage war over such silly things like ethnicity, religion, ideology, etc.? And the reality is that if you look over human history, war is normal, peace is not, and every era of history will justify wars for whatever ideological reason matters to that society. And so looking back on this conflict won't see it as an incel revolution. They'll see it as an ideological war between the right and the left. And people will create ideological.
Now, in fairness, I think actually something might be worth noting there. You could effectively, if the majority of the people fighting in the revolution were in fact incels, it wouldn't necessarily have to be called an incel revolution for that to functionally be what it would be. Actually, Red Pet, I just see here, has proposed Elon as the leader of such a revolution. Perhaps. I've often said
probably more likely.
If there's one person in America who could legitimately be Batman, it's Elon Musk. He owns enough companies that make like supercars and rocket ships and everything else. Now, as to JC Armitage, I am going to address your comment here about me calling Tate a clown. I stand by that statement. You can say that Andrew Tate takes the Manosphere Red Pill to its logical conclusion. The reason I say that Tate is a clown, though, Tate literally made his money exploiting the very incels that he claims to care for. He has openly bragged about how he started a porn business, which he robbed young men of their money, pretending to give them love, as he himself typed messages. Well, his flirty little that he claimed were coming from his flirty girls that were running his business. And now he claims to be the leader of the very men that he's ripped off to build his empire. So yeah, Tate is a clown, and I'm standing by that statement.
Logical justifications and not admit how hard their lives are, even though the reason for the war is that their lives suck. The thing is, if you went back in time and interviewed the normal young men and soldiers fighting in historic wars, like, let's say, the 30 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, they would say they were fighting because they couldn't get married or they couldn't find real work. And historians afterwards will rationalize the war for all these complex macro political ideological reasons. But the reality is it's often just people's lives are too hard. This would be a war fought over ideology.
Okay, and again, the reasons the individual soldier fights in a war don't necessarily correspond to the broader political reasons of its leadership. So, I think that he does raise a valid point. Whether it's an incel revolution per se, if right now we've got a large number of fighting age men with nothing to live for and nothing to fight for, if you could conceivably give them a reason to fight, whether it was explicitly said, whether the explicit promise of a wife and a family and the ability to have sex were spelled out explicitly or not, there are all kinds of conceivable political movements that could put some men to use. But it's not going to be the political left that's been shitting on these men for decades. It's going to be some form of movement on the political right.
Logical reasons. But keep in mind, is 80% of young men are currently screwed in the modern dating market, and young men are those who fight wars, would mean that both the right and the left's militaries would be made up of sexually frustrated young men. The great irony here is that as women have gained more social power, they have used this to abdicate responsibility, which in turn makes them more fragile. The ends point of modern feminism has been to abdicate responsibility for women. A woman can never have her feelings hurt on political topics or intellectual ones, never feel awkward around men, socially, or held responsible in the failures of her own life. The problem—
Very true. Very true.
Is that reality is a horrible demon which will keep kicking you in the face if you don't want to listen to it. This has created a weak population which is incapable of resisting the revolution. One of my hobbies is data harvesting. I talk to hundreds of young people and ask them their opinions on various subjects. I also read the comment section of any content creators I can as a way of figuring out what the cultural zeitgeist is. I also release certain tweets and do polls to collect information what the public thinks on various things. On a purely intuitive basis, and you don't have to believe me, a large group of young men are desperate enough that they need to do this to not go crazy. Technological advances have made the ability to organize secretly through various encrypted online methods very easy. People will say, most young men are too fat, lazy, or docile to rebel. That might be true, but most people don't matter. In revolutions, there are tiny elites who mobilize the population. Normal people
Tiny
don't—
elites, as he's showing a picture of Napoleon Bonaparte, the guy notorious for being tiny.
Yes, notorious for being tiny, but he was a strategic genius. Now, again, valid point here. Even if the majority of society is too fat to fight, all you need is a large enough force that has the skill and weapons capability to compel the lazy side of society. And I think, yeah, history does support that. When the Nazis roll over the border and annex your country, see how fast the women start sleeping with their officers and the men give up and join the opposite side. I mean, it does go to show people, by and large, I always think of the line from Men in Black, a person is smart. People are dumb, panicky idiots. the vast majority of society will not fight back and take the path of least resistance. All you need is a small enough, determined enough, fighting capable portion of society capable of going along with different convening government force. Coffee House Dialogue says Napoleon was actually not that short, if I recall correctly. I think he was like 5'7".
Yeah, I guess
5'7".
I should say as a caveat, I do hear the possibility or even likelihood that that's actually not true, even though it's a popular factoid, air quotes.
I think he was like 5'6", 5'7", so shorter, and in that day and age, people weren't as tall anyways. I think it just the rumor comes about he was smaller than some of the rulers of his day and perhaps members of his court, and the short guy syndrome that still exists existed back then. He felt he was notorious for trying to be very charismatic and flaunt his position to make up for the fact that he wasn't the tallest guy in the room. But who knows what that really was.
Organized, thus.
I don't know if you want to address this now, but JC Armitage says this in a live chat comment right now, and they said it a little bit further up. Also, this guy had a half-truth. Wars are inevitable when it comes to governments, not societies, like he's strongly implying.
Well, yes, it's true. War is a tool of government in that the initiation of force is, by definition, a government function. So yes, in a free society, you don't have war. When you have someone initiate war, by definition, they've become a government. So
I guess that's JC's point that they're trying to arise is the fact that Rudyard is just tackling purely just the social side of this whole issue, not necessarily the government and freedom from government side of whether or not a sexual incel revolution will happen or not.
I think so. And where I'm coming from, everyone knows my position on government. I'm an ANCAP. I hate government. My point, what I'm interested in looking into is we can talk about the evils of the government all day. The fact is the government is a reality on the ground, at least for now. The growing population of incels is a reality on the ground, and it doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. So I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what really is going to happen. And of course, at the end, I'm going to give my thoughts on what I think. What should we do in light of this information? But let's get to the end first.
I think we can, on that point, I think what we can at least agree anyways, anarchy or minimalist government, either way, I think that more freedom for individuals would end up being a little bit of a reset as far as people's sexual lives goes. And therefore, it would mitigate the possibility or even completely destroy the possibility of a quote, incel revolution.
All right, continue.
Their opinions don't matter, and they're conscripted by the radicals. Before the English Civil War, it was conventional wisdom that the English had grown too soft to fight. They didn't get a choice as the Cavaliers and Roundheads conscripted men to fight for them. One of the few valid arguments against this point stems from the Mouse Utopia video. This is a...
Okay, I'm just going to say as an aside, I have watched Whatifalthist's video about Mouse Utopia, so I'm sure he's going to condense it down here. But if anyone's not familiar, this has come up in a lot of different content creators lately. This was an experiment run back in the 60s and 70s where mice were put into a situation like a cage where they could infinitely multiply, and they had as much food as they needed to survive. And the question was, what would happen? And I think he's got a really long video that describes it further if you're interested, but we'll listen to what he says here.
Long enough argument where I can't get into here, but read this text wall for more information. Basically, the nihilism and degeneracy of modern culture is unprecedented. A study on mice from 1960s and 70s, which gave them perfect conditions for population growth, which then resulted in seeing their society fall apart, had very similar and scary conditions to the modern world. The thing is, the mice grew effeminate and weak. They stopped breeding. An important thing to think about, and the best argument against this to steelman the case, is that if you look at Mouse Utopia, the mice had rapid declines in male hormones like testosterone, similar to what we're seeing in the Western world today among men. And I feel kind of nervous saying stuff like this, because when you give...
What was that?
I said, hit the gym, y'all.
Indeed you should. Indeed you should. But I think it does go to show without the natural stressors of life that animals or people are required to overcome, they tend to become weak, which is in a society with too little conflict and sedatives like porn and video games makes a lot of sense.
Someone 5 options and a single out, they'll often immediately jump on the out without thinking as a way to not deal with the issue. But perhaps due to Mouse Utopia, young men are too weak to actually fight. That being said, knowing young men, I don't think that's actually the case. That being said, if young men don't stand up for their position, even on a peaceful basis, our mouse colony is doomed, as procreation and society will fall apart. What happened in every...
And on that point again, right now we're below replacement birth rate. Elon Musk, I do think he's done a good job drawing attention to this. But when you have 1.5 babies per woman in the United States, 0.5 babies in Korea, and literally the only countries in the world that have a replacement or higher birth rate are like poor parts of Africa and Asia, yeah, your societal population collapse is going to be the natural result.
Every single version of the Mouse Utopia experiment was that the colony totally failed, collapsing down to 0. Gangs of evil mice killed those who continued to procreate. This is the equivalent of the antenatal governments pushing various degrowth policies which crash the birth rate so much so that society goes extinct. That being said, this young male revolt would be absolutely horrifying to witness. People return whatever they've been given in most times. Society has treated young men as subhuman for years, and so I expect the rebels to do the same to their enemies. We actually live in a profoundly non-moral culture in that we don't hold anyone to hard moral standards. What this means is that once the blood starts flowing, no one believes in moral standards enough to check their bloodlust. This war will be far less humane than the previous American Civil War or Revolution. I've been betting my money for years that America will have a rape crisis at some point in the future. I've said in previous videos that for a bunch of reasons.
Yes. So basically what you were saying before, he is saying he believes a rape crisis is coming. When the military and the police break down, he believes there will be mass instances of men raping women.
Which I explained in this text wall, that the right would win a civil war. That being said, you've suddenly armed a group of sexually frustrated, resentful young men. They'll probably view women as a leftist enemy, and thus...
Oh, and it looks like, according to JC Armitage, either mine or someone else's mic botted out, a rape culture is what he was saying. What Whatifalthist is predicting is that he's predicting that at some point there are going to be mass instances of men raping women in the United States.
Feel no remorse for being brutal. There is no unifying ideology on the right, which means it will be exceptionally difficult to maintain a strong...
Now, what I can say is I can't say I necessarily agree that's going to happen. I think it certainly will become as police, welfare, and other government walls break down, it's going to happen much more often. I personally think that is going to hightail society back towards a more traditional one, in that women are going to be much more willing to accept Joe average beta male as their husband, so long as he protects them from enduring that kind of hardship. I don't think it can last as long as he's indicating it would, but I think, yes, the lack of security against that would be the factor that's going to drive women beyond the patriarchy, as it were.
Wow. I think that this graph here is pretty accurate. Sad that the biggest elephants of this chart here that makes up of everybody who is like on the right are like 3 kind of authoritarian elephants. Biblical bloc, cultural protectionist bloc, those who want to ban porn and drugs, and then populist, pessimist / anti-Washington bloc.
Definitely.
Which I guess isn't inherently authoritarian. I mean, being anti-Washington, that by itself is pretty anti-authoritarian, but the idea of being a populist specifically, that would mean that you're just changing your beliefs with whatever is like goes with the flow with the vast majority of whatever particular constituency they go through, that you're trying to appeal to. Principles be damned. And if the populist organization is anti-Washington, but they want to institute their own authoritarianism or something like that, yeah. You're saying 2 cents?
Yeah, but I don't really have anything to add there. But just to sum up, I think he's absolutely right. We've got large but disparate blocks of ideological positions in society, all of whom have really nothing in common anymore, that are being forced to side with either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. And like I said, with all the problems I have with Donald Trump, do I still think he'd be a better president than Kamala Harris? Yes, but even so, it really doesn't change much. So, which goes to show, you've got tons of people being forced to side with one side or the other of political establishment that they have very little in common with anyways. It's ripe for societal distress.
Biblical refusing,
which will probably devolve into various warlords using effectively sex as a chip to keep their young men following them. For women in my audience, please be very, very careful in the future. To be clear, I'm not saying this is a threat, but out of genuine concern for what I think will be something truly horrible. And the great irony is that for me, just expressing this concern, I will undoubtedly be called a evil misogynist, which is just ironic.
Hey everyone! So the team decided to do a fun competition.
Shut up, Harris. Shut up.
If you're able to make a
there are two changes women have pushed, which have really shocked me.
Yes.
In that graph earlier, I saw some interesting ideology that I never heard of before, called biblical refusenics. A caveat dialogue. If you're still in the live chat there, tell me what that is, be it in the live chat or in my Discord or something.
Can't say I know what it is. If you want to do a quick Google search, go ahead.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I do apologize, everyone, for the Kamala Harris ad. I guess we've been going for too long, and Whatifalthist has to make some money from ads.
All right.
Since they remove leverage against men. One is
what I'm going to add here. I think he's absolutely right. Women need to be careful because, again, push comes to shove, women are the physically weaker sex. If there's an all-out war between men and women, who do you think's going to win? For all the repression of women's rights taking place in Saudi Arabia or Iran, I don't see a whole lot of armed women storming the royal palace in Saudi Arabia or the Ayatollah's home in Iran. So yeah, women need to protect themselves. How do they do it? I would say the best thing they can do is return to traditional values and traditional family structure. Get yourself a husband who cares about you and have children with him and wants to protect you and those children. That is probably the best thing you can do to protect yourself. However, until women as a whole together realize they need to stop giving away sex for free to the few high value men so that they can retain their value and get a single husband who loves and cares for them, I don't see that changing on a mass scale. But the best thing women can do is, yes, be a traditional woman, wait until you're married to have sex, marry a good man, not necessarily don't shoot your shot too high, find a good man who can protect you and care for you. That is, and become part of a society of other families that believe the same. That is what I think women need to do to protect themselves.
To fund the police. Women have been able to use the state to protect.
And it's hilarious because, of course, yeah, look at all these women saying to fund the police when literally calling the police is the only thing that's stopping them from getting raped in many circumstances.
Them in the same way that men have for most of human history.
Unless they do
by removing the
themselves.
state's protective ability, women put themselves in a precarious position where they need men to protect them, but they have since alienated their relationship with men who could protect them, or our society doesn't train men to be able to protect them in general. This creates incredibly bad incentives for predatory young men. The second is birth control. I'm surprised so few other people have realized this, but birth control gives young men tremendous leverage over women. For human history, a man would get a woman pregnant and then have to deal with her and the child.
Did you have a comment there, Darkon?
Nothing. I was just found that point interesting. Men birth control is a way for men to have like control over women and whether or not they get pregnant. And also, I was kind of reacting to the M-preg picture on the screen right now.
Yes. Well, I think what he is correct about is that prior to birth control, women, by and large, birth control allowed women to be promiscuous in a way they could not be before. When pregnancy was a very risk factor before modern condoms, modern birth control pills, being a hoe was costly before birth control. It's still costly, but less. But thanks to abortion / birth control, women can correct the natural consequences of hoish behavior in a way they couldn't in societies past.
With birth control, powerful men can just use women for sex and then not have any consequences, which would then give the women leverage. I find porn very worrying here, where it pushes unrealistic and disgusting expectations upon men who often don't have much sexual experience. I've said before, I think the propagation of porn will have an enormous effect on history. Almost all men at this point have seen thousands of women naked, which has to change psychology and attitudes towards sex in a profound way. If you give young men power and porn is the source of their expectations, that's not good. At the same time, showing men the most beautiful women in the world naked while they don't have actually many sexual opportunities is a horrible combination because it builds up envy and resentment without a release. The de facto removal of monogamy would probably result in terrible dynamics where the new rightist nobility keeps harems while they dole out sex to their followers in exchange for loyalty. This is not a pleasant reality, and I'm not sure it's...
What do you know? He actually puts Andrew Tate on the screen.
Yeah.
the most likely, but it's certainly a possibility. I think the reason women like The Handmaid's Tale so much is partly since it's a very good book. In fact, I would say it's one of the best science fiction books ever written, but also women intuitively realize how precarious they're.
How familiar are you with The Handmaid's Tale, Darkon?
I've heard stuff about how that there is like restrictions on women's rights, but some of that is spurred about from I think it's a nuclear apocalypse alongside there being like some kind of diseases that is sterilized a lot of humans to where that they are incentivized to be restrictive on women and their reproduction so that they could try and spur along higher birth rates to keep the human race going, as opposed to just letting it fizzle out because of the sterilization or something like that.
Okay, that's some of that's in there. That's not quite the premise. But essentially, in a futuristic society, the U.S. government gets overthrown by quote-unquote Christian extremists who, in an effort to correct the imbalance of the low fertility rate, institute all kinds of... Women are not allowed to own property or have money. They have no societal rights any longer, and a lot of women are forced to breed in what's called the handmaid program. Basically, the best way I can summarize The Handmaid's Tale is it describes a conservative Muslim society like what we see in Saudi Arabia or Iran coming to power in America, but instead it's a Christian society vice a Muslim society. The irony being, the thing I always point out about The Handmaid's Tale is they act like it's this futuristic society that's to come in America by Christian extremists, when the reality is what the society which The Handmaid's Tale describes very much exists today, just in places like Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Their liberties are, in that for most of history, men have treated women as property. A lot of people on the right have said that men haven't oppressed women over history. And I do think gender roles are driven off biology, but I can't write off female genital mutilation, foot binding, or PERDA. An important point here is that with the crashing birth rate, we will have to return to more historical, normal gender standards. In the incredibly rapid population growth of the 20th century, population growth was put at a low level of importance since it was occurring so rapidly anyway. However, as the world's population will start to plummet over the course of the 21st century, our culture will rapidly have to put a very heavy emphasis on family values, since raising the birth rate will become the most important thing for survival. To circle back to the beginning, humans are foolish and irrational creatures. We overreact when our emotions feel hurt, and one of the worst parts of the human condition are the oscillations between pendulums of both unpleasant realities. This is very plain to see, for example, in Latin America, where a right-wing tyranny will be followed by a left-wing tyranny. Opposite politics, but both of which are tyrannies. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth will make the world go blind past a certain point, even though you still need to punish evil. That being said, we have the power at this point to stop this overcorrection from being horrifying. Between us stand two rocks, one which is complete social extinction, and the other a society of sex slaves. It's up to us to steer between Scylla and Charybdis.
Well, that was an abrupt end.
Indeed. Well, he doesn't really say what his suggestion is there, but I think it does go to show, like he said, will this revolution be violent? Will it be more economic collapse? What's it going to look like? Hard to tell. Admittedly, the abrupt ending there. He doesn't really give what he thinks, like how is this all going to play out. I'm not sure. What I'm going to say is I definitely is not going to be good. My opinion, again, I think if I had to sum up what I think is going to happen, I think the incel revolution, as you might call it, is going to be more related to more and more men refusing to do the hard jobs that are necessary to run society. As this corresponds to the collapse of the US dollar and the coming economic collapse, we are going to see government lose its ability to exert force on society. Police forces become less effective, militaries become less effective, and one way or another, those power gaps get filled, whether by local level governments taking on greater responsibility or some type of violent revolution. I think it's probably going to be a mixture of both. What do I think society can best do to protect from this? Well, as I've done, if you are able, I'd say move out to the rural country, learn the old ways of homesteading and being able to provide for yourself. Make sure you own guns and the means to protect yourself, as well as work on developing livestock, being able to produce food and things to survive. Build communities with people who share your values, and at least then you can be prepared for what's coming. I don't know, it ain't going to be pretty, but at least you can be prepared to protect yourselves, working together, and hopefully rebuild a new, freer society out of the ashes that come. I wish I could say more than that, but I think there definitely is a lot to discuss here. So, Darkon, you have any thoughts?
None really. I mean, I pretty much agree with what you said there, although it's kind of inconvenient for me because I just signed a new lease for a new apartment, though I should probably start reaching out to friends who have their connections with people in the countryside or whatever, so that maybe if things go to shit, I can at least offer myself as a farmhand or whatever.
All right. Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of Whatifalthist video, the coming incel revolution. Again, the purpose of this wasn't to debunk him. I'm not disagreeing with a lot of what he says. I think I can't say for sure that I agree with all the conclusions he draws, but he's definitely talking about some stuff there that is going to be relevant whether we like it or not. So I will put it to, if there is anyone has any additional comments in the chat they would like us to address, let me quickly look through here, and then we will put an end to it there.
I'm trying to see for myself.
So The Handmaid's Tale is basically a manosphere red pill utopia. Not necessarily. I will say it's because the world of The Handmaid's Tale was supposedly a conservative Christian society. It wasn't necessarily sexually liberated in that men were getting to have sex all the time. It was just that women's rights were taken away. Like I said, I'd say that again. I wouldn't say The Handmaid's Tale reflects what you might call a manosphere red pill utopia. It reflects a conservative Muslim totalitarian society, except they replaced Islam with Christianity.
So one of the first comments that Mr. Merchant said was, one reason I don't think an incel revolution will happen is because men have the dominance instinct, which is the male equivalent of hypergamy. Thus, men can't form a revolution when men compete against each other. Which that makes me think of a point. I don't know if it's related to anything that Mr. Merchant mentioned, but I mean, what I have to think about Rudyard's video, it was overall a pretty all over the place, not very well constructed, let alone did it have a good wrap up of everything that he said at the end of his video there. But one thing that he did not address was the whole idea of what the dynamics of the incel revolution will look like. Because obviously, what are we trying to say here? Are we trying to say that it's going to be purely just men versus women? I mean, no, obviously not. The smart assumption would be obviously not. And I don't think that he was doing himself any favors by not addressing the possibility of what kind of men would be fighting against what other kind of men in the coming supposed incel revolution. Like, you're going to obviously have some more dignified men who are going to protect women who are just refraining from giving incels. And I mean like actual incels, and some trademark incels too, incel community members, from sex just because they just naturally do not like them. Not necessarily because of their incels, but because they're just not the right type of man. But those incels are just going to like go thinking that's something else entirely, that woman is just some feminist bitch, sexist towards men or something. But she's still going to be protected by the more dignified and, quite frankly, right-leaning and conservative-ish men in their lives. For good reason, too.
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing to draw is a large amount of young fighting age men with nothing to live for and nothing to fight for is a very exploitable base in society that can either cause mass violence or, mass economic collapse, even if it's not necessarily violent. The question is, what are they going to do? Is there anyone who can conceivably, and there are a lot of people who can and will exploit them towards their ends. I mean, you can even see, like I said, I call out Andrew Tate for basically what makes Andrew Tate such scum is that he made his money exploiting the people he now tries to support. On one hand, he built up a porn industry that, by his own admission, is hurting the people that he wants to help so that they're giving him money. And then he turns around and says, I'll teach you how to be a real man. Give me even more of your money. So he's essentially double whammying them by creating the industry that puts them in their pitiful circumstances and then offering them the solution. He's as bad as any government in that he breaks, I think it was, what's the guy's name? Harry Brown said, government breaks your leg, hands you a crutch, and says, see, without us, you couldn't even walk. That's Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate breaks your leg, hands you a crutch, and says, see, without me, you couldn't even walk. Yeah.
I wonder if what the parody, the Disney / Andrew Tate parody of I Will Make a Man Out of You would look like.
Indeed.
You do know incels can and often does mean someone who feels entitled to sex and or someone who engages in collectivism based on biological sex, right? Asks JC a lot earlier. Did Rudyard mention it in like the first half of the video when we covered that like 2 weeks ago, that there are the trademark incel community members who just proudly proclaim themselves as incels and just really generally hate women overall? And then there's like actual incels who don't hate women, just naturally cannot find themselves sex.
Yeah, and I think here what's the problem is, like I said, incel has become almost a meaningless term because on one hand, incel is just if you criticize women online, you get called an incel. It's like being accused of having a small dick. It's an insult that people throw around when they can't refute your arguments. On the other hand, you have men who are legitimately incels. It's that they want to be having sex, but they aren't. And then you have perhaps the more extreme variant, the school shooter type who actually believes he's owed sex and wants to commit mass violence against women because he's not getting the sex he believes he's owed. I mean, there's a lot of room for variance in there, but I think all he's talking about is regardless of which camp a person would fall into, there's an increasingly larger number of men who are not getting the sex they want and are likely to fall into become part of this exploitable class of men as a result. Whether they take the more extreme view or not. All right. Well, on that note, Jonathan O, I'll just address your comment quickly. He says, talk about the second Trump assassination. All right. I will quickly give you my thoughts. From what I understand, someone snuck onto the barrier of Donald Trump's golf course with an AK-47. Before Donald Trump got to the next hole, Secret Service was at the hole. They saw the rifle barrel and shot at the guy. He got away, but a witness took a picture of his license plate, which they got to the sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department then arrested him. So whoever was planning to try and kill Donald Trump is alive and in custody. If he is mysteriously killed before he comes to trial, perhaps this was another inside job. If he goes to trial, then he was probably just some nut trying to kill Donald Trump, because let's face it, we've been hit with wall-to-wall coverage about how Donald Trump is an existential threat to society, and we shouldn't be. MSNBC blamed it on Trump because of his rhetoric. Of course they did. Of course they did.
Wow.
Well, I'll close with what I've said before. I'm no fan of Donald Trump. His comments about tariffs show that he's an economic ignoramus. He gave us the COVID vaccine, the COVID lockdowns, Dr. Fauci. He was responsible for plenty of overseas interventions I don't think were particularly good, even though perhaps not as bad as some of his predecessors. There's a lot of negative things you can say about Donald Trump. That being said, he's got a better head on his shoulders than Kamala Harris. And for all the crap he's been through, I think the man deserves to be president a second time. It's hard not to like the guy, if for no other reason than he just keeps getting back up. So Godspeed, Donald Trump. Glad you're still alive. And to everyone else out there, I will just say, I'll repeat, I've talked about this before. My philosophy as a MGTOW for men's issues is this. I don't preclude, heaven forbid, I would be the one to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. I think men really are in a crappy position in society today. What I have to say is the only person looking out for your best interest is you. So long as you are doing what you want because it's what you want and you've objectively decided that's what's best for you, I applaud you. But I recommend take charge of your own life. Decide what it is you want to do with your life and then go for it and make it about things within your control. Doesn't matter how much no amount of wishing is going to make me taller or make all the women I want love me. But I decide how much hard work I put into becoming the best engineer I can be, or farmer I can be, or whatever I decide my career is going to be, whatever hobbies I choose to invest in, how I choose to save or invest my money, or do what I can with what's mine. Make those decisions do what's best for you and figure that out. As I've brought this up many times. One of my favorite scenes in all of film is in the movie The Greatest Showman, when Hugh Jackman's character is approaching this young man who's a midget and asking him if he'll be a performer in his circus. And the guy, the midget, looks at his feet and he just says, "You want them to laugh at me, don't you?" And Hugh Jackman says, "They're already laughing at you, son. You might as well get paid." And that is basically my life's philosophy. I can't control.
Probably like the best words that can be said to, best piece of advice that can be said to everyone relating to this issue, instead of hyper theorizing and fear mongering about the possibility of an incel revolution.
Right. You can't control what other people do. You can't control how tall you are. Unfortunately, there's very little influence you have over what the government does. You decide what you're going to do with every minute of every day and with what belongs to you. Just take charge of your life and do what's best for you with that. And that is the best advice I can give to you. So without further ado, thank you everyone for joining. And that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.
Good night, y'all.